Steve.
Hi, everyone. I'm Steve Loughran, and a quick introduction about myself. I work at home. I work on Hadoop full-time. Hands up who uses Hadoop or the libraries. OK, you're running my code. All right. You'll notice it if you see stack traces. The key point is I code from home. Now, title of this talk, Household INFOSEC in a Post-Sony Era. What does that mean? Well, a couple of years ago, Sony got completely owned. They had all their data out there, their embarrassing emails, their spreadsheets on star salaries, everything got ripped apart. And all the security people were saying, oh, Sony got it wrong. Sony didn't have their defense in depth, their log tracking, all their security stuff. What were they doing wrong? And I felt that was a bit cruel because I'm thinking, could I secure my own house? Would I know what would happen? How can I criticize them without being in a state myself to defend the things? So I thought, right, well, I will do it. I will try and make my house secure. As a summary of the talk, I failed dramatically for reasons we'll get into, okay? But I would be surprised if you could do any better. And if you I'd like some answers. I think key point is say, what am I trying to do? So I'm trying to make my house secure. Or more importantly, I want the data in it to be secure. I want it to be uncorrupted. I want to be able to get that data when I want it. Don't want it to be encrypted and having to pay in bitcoins for it back. So I want it available. And I want it to be mine as in private. I don't want it to be up on the web unless I specifically put it there. The final thing, resource control, means I want my son to go to bed and not watch YouTube when he's in bed. Okay, so that's a special case. So the first lesson from the Sony hack is do not make an enemy of a government or anyone with similar skills. Anonymous, other full-time hacker groups. None of us stand a chance in that world. If somebody's going to sit down and break into you, knowing who you are, what you run, that kind of stuff, you're doomed. So get over it by not making enemies like that. Scope things back and say, right, I'm going to defend against drive-bys. Malware that just basically does a brute force attack, scans my network, tries to go through the browsers, things like that. Well, they're not really targeting me. They're targeting everyone in mass market attacks. So that's my goal. Can I defend against that? But you've got to think about privacy too. The key point is when I started looking at security, I should think about not just how to stop people malicious getting in, but stop my personal data getting out. I think the big difference between security then and privacy is security is how vulnerable is my systems to having somebody break in, whereas privacy is more how much of my personal information does this well-designed app leak outside my house even when it's behaving as intended. Privacy violations are built into modern systems, I think would be my conclusion. So I went around trying to split things up onto that different scale, vulnerability versus privacy. Nice and simple, beginning, a notepad, piece of paper and a pencil. Nobody can steal it unless they get into your house. Doesn't really leak data to the outside world unless I stick photos up online. Doesn't have much of a backup strategy either. If the house burns down, the paper's gone. So that's a price, but it's secure. The other end of the scale, Windows XP, the most insecure system you can buy right now. Well, you can't buy it. You wouldn't even bother to download it. By the time you've installed it, somebody will have found it on the network and be running things. The sole reason it won't be running Bitcoin mining is it's so out of date that they probably don't get the decent device drivers for the GPUs. So just hands up who's got Windows XP in their house. I was buying something 2 weeks ago in a shop, and they had a Windows XP shopping till for the money, which is terrifying. It's embedded out there. So that's 11 on the security scale. The other one is the privacy scale. 11 is Google. Okay, they want everything about you. They want to know everything about you. They're trying to model you. So that's the other axis. So now let's look around and let's have a look at what our systems we have. What do I think they are in terms of security and vulnerability? So Firefox, hands up Firefox. Now, I think actually it's pretty secure as long as you keep it up to date. You also have to run your ad blockers out there because that's the standard attack for drive-bys is people will place an ad saying, I want people running Windows XP with Firefox and Flash installed, and they own you. So keep it up to date. What's nice? It's relatively secure It's relatively private, except once you make Google your search engine. And then we have Chrome. I actually think it's better for keeping itself up to date, but in exchange, it's permanently sharing all your personal data. If you're curious, bring up Wireshark and start listening to how much packets are being sent. Once you're logged into Chrome, it's just permanently chattering away. I have no idea what it's doing. I tried to actually uninstall this and go myself userless, but then everything broke at that point, so I've logged in and accept the inevitable there. And then there's Internet Explorer. Don't run this. That's all the summary, just don't run it. Okay? Download Firefox or Chrome and then just leave it alone. Flash. Don't run that either if you can help it, really. It's insecurity jitters between a 9 and a 10 every 2 weeks. So it starts off at the beginning of the month with a 9. There'll be an emergency patch 2 weeks later, it goes to 10. So it's a losing battle. The best thing you do is uninstall it. You can maybe go with Chrome. It does keep it up to date, maybe in the background. It also leaks privacy in different ways because it has its own cookies. So you think you've deleted your cookies? You haven't. The best metric that you have Flash isn't working is you go to the BBC website and you can't watch videos about Donald Trump. I think that's a success that we should all be grateful for. That's stopping your mind being damaged at the same time. So now we have a nice scale, basically. We have privacy up the top, vulnerability down below. It's notable I've put everything at the end of the vulnerability scale. And it's also interesting that things get more and more vulnerable over time. If you leave something alone, it just inherently becomes more insecure. But that's just a PC. That's not what my house is like. I go into the room next to my office, and there is, sometimes, too often, a child in front of a television. He's playing a video game, online video game, on a PS4, hooked up through a smart TV, through an amplifier that has an Ethernet port in the back for AirPlay. He has an iPad where he's watching a YouTube video, and there is a phone where he's actually talking to his friends on Snapchat. That is my son. And most of these things, they are consumer goods. The one I'm going to call out is the television by LG, where someone found a couple of years ago that it was sending unencrypted packets to LG servers in Korea, South Korea that is, letting them know what terrestrial TV channels you were tuned into. That's a television that's basically sampling what you're watching. And there's a bit of embarrassment about that, and LG basically changed their privacy policy to say, yes, we can, and children shouldn't be watching this TV because it's personal information. I brought up Wireshark. I couldn't see it, but on the other hand, it chatters away, and it's using encrypted channels now, so it might be. And that's the dividing line between a smart television and a dumb monitor. Okay, dumb monitors don't steal your personal secrets. And there's nothing in there to get owned. And of course, all this is defended from the outside world by a Netgear firewall. Oh, I forgot to ask people. Hands up who's got a PS4 at home? Smart TV? Netgear firewall between them and the outside world. Yeah, okay. Well, the scary thing about this is it's a few years old, and every time I check for a firmware update, it says there isn't none. And you think, how many more security patches and violation have come up over time? And this one goes, no, nothing insecure. I got fed up with this and went and downloaded the DDWRT open source firewall stuff instead. It's incredibly good. It's incredibly powerful. It's got lots of features. I couldn't get it to work. Or more specifically, I couldn't get the PPPoE stuff to work with my ISP, British Telecom. So I sort of half gave up on that. Stuck it in the middle, saying it's probably insecure, relatively private, and said, right, I'm going to give up on that, and instead I'm going to solve the problem slightly differently. So what I did is went out and bought a new Netgear firewall, and I'm just going to assume that consumer devices like this, they're going to have a finite lifespan of about 2 or 3 years before I start trying to open source them. And I took that old router, flashed it to DDWRT, and actually created a separate subnet inside my house. So I've evidently partitioned the stuff I really care about, my laptop, my development tools, the code you're running. And that's isolated from the stuff that my son's trying to run, consumer electronics, the televisions, the PS4s, there's a Raspberry Pi on there, there's another smart TV. We're building this collection of internet-enabled devices in our house. We have no idea what the source code is. They don't get kept up to date. And how can you trust your doorbell or your light switch to be secure anymore? So I've isolated them out. That doesn't mean I've got no control over the privacy, but at least I can kind of limit the damage they can do. And I think that's the best I can hope for. I would like to declare success at this point, but like I said, I've been fighting a losing battle because I have a smartphone. Smartphones in the room? Hands up. Yeah, you lose. Here are two examples of phones. This is Android. Android goes through privacy even worse. On the left, British Airways check-in app. Hands up, British Airways check-in apps? Good. It wants to know my calendar, my private details, my location, and all my photos. That's on the left. Screenshot next to it. It says I'm flying to Terminal Null in Nairobi. So someone out there doesn't know their SQL validation about data that comes back over the wire. That's a warning sign. That means whoever wrote that code isn't going to be writing a secure app. Similarly, there's EasyJet. They want to know my identity, location, photos, camera, device ID, and call information, who I'm talking to. And it's got a null pointer exception there. It's the same thing. The developers are well-meaning, but they've asked for far too much permission, and like the rest of us, we can't write code that works properly. That's not a fault of them. We're all the same. But it's just, the fact is the phone's given all this information, and then even if the airplanes aren't maliciously stealing my private calendar details, it's insecure. And we're building that in, and it goes outside the firewall. So we've lost control there. So that's an 11. Okay, our phones are 11. So I didn't like the Android. I went and bought an iPhone instead, and I was really excited. Now, in preparing for this talk, I was going to bring up a slide saying, hey, look, last year Android knew where I was going. This year I go to Google location, and they don't know where I'm going. Except it turns out Google knew that I drove from Bristol to a bit of Wales, and they could even work out how illegally fast I was driving based on the timestamps along there. And the reason for that turned out to be Google Photos. I thought maybe actually the Google Mail tracking was doing it, but in fact, Google Photos heartbeats in, letting Google Central know where you are for a better photographic experience. Google Photos, hands up? No. Turn the location data off. In fact, if you're going to run anything Google, make sure it's not logging you. But basically, Google seems to be doing everything they can to track you and model you and everything like that. So, I think we've lost there as well. And then, of course, comes my little fitness tracker. Fitness bits, hands up, fitness trackers. Yeah, no. Okay. That's sending my heartbeat and sleeping habits up to Microsoft somewhere. Now, that's the same people at Microsoft that wrote Windows XP, though I think they've learned. Interestingly enough, I think someone else, Fitbit, there was a virus that was going over Bluetooth between their devices. Also, they were unintentionally publishing when people were having sex, which when you combine with a Facebook graph, you can work out who they're up to with. I also have a little bicycle speedometer thing that tracks my location too. Both of those devices, they upload my GPS data to services like Strava, sorry. But at least I'm getting something in exchange for my information. I can take my heartbeat and data, my sleeping habits. I can go to my doctor and say, look, I'm having a bad time sleeping, or my heart rate's too high. I can go on Strava and say, look, I'm doing work. So yes, I'm leaking lots of information there, but I am getting something back for it. I also think compared to something like a phone, these are relatively secure. So I'm going to put them, security, probably a 3, privacy, 6+. And then things just got worse. We got a second-hand car last September, October, which was 3 years old. Had a previous owner. Now, I actually tried to download the vehicle history off this, only they wouldn't really let me at it. The point being, it's all there. The car knows when it's been driven, how long ABS has been engaged, whether it was in manual mode or automatic, or all the kind of things that you shouldn't be doing with a car is in that log. So it would be nice for me to know when we resell it, I have to think about erasing all that history because my wife drives it badly. But then you get suspicious. When you go and buy a new car, you go, let's look at its driving history, and it's like, oh no, it's empty. It'd be like when you buy a car and the engine's all been cleaned up. It means, oh no, it was leaking oil and they've hidden it. So that's a privacy violation being hard-coded into our vehicles. And what about it? Where I live in Bristol, it's hilly. So all I think I need to do would basically know vehicle acceleration, speed, duration of distance between stops. And you can work out where I live, where my son goes to school, where our journeys are. So it's not just a history of vehicle use, it's a history of how I've traveled around the country, at least when I'm driving. Combine that with my phone and my little fitness tracker, and basically you know everything about where I go to. So that's not very good on a privacy perspective. What do you think it's like security size? 3, 4, 5? Any ideas? Okay, I thought it was pretty good until eventually I sat down to read the full infotainment manual. And it tells me how to turn Flash off. This is not a joke. This is from the manual. It's like settings, sound, cookies, change to mobile web page view, call up options, activate Flash player. And it's like, I was terrified at this point. I mean, you run around to the car to make sure it's not really running Flash. Oh, yeah, that's a good point, really. So that's certificates, isn't it? That's don't warn about illegal certificates. And, of course, this is the car that's hooked up to my phone and then gets back to my laptop. So it's a couple of hops away. Anyway, I was very lucky. We got there and we discovered that the previous owner of this car had not paid the premium for the Flash option. So, we dodged a bullet there. But when you buy a second-hand car, you don't say, does it have Flash installed? I don't know why you're laughing. Hands up who's bought a car for this within 4 years old or less. Did it have Flash installed? Exactly. Exactly. We don't know. We have absolutely lost control. People go on about Dieselgate being a scandal. I mean, cars are designed to kill people anyway, but putting Flash in is immorally wrong. Anyway, at that point, I'm going to have to conclude that we're out of control. So you put the privacy and security stuff up there, and the fact that there's Windows XP there isn't actually so bad anymore because we've got a phone up there and we've got a car with Flash installed. And then, I'm sending my entire heartbeat and sleeping habits up to Microsoft. And that's basically it, really. We've lost. Okay, I can't secure my house anymore. In the last few months, I've become aware of how utterly insecure my house is. But sure, I can keep Firefox up to date. I can, install a new Flash player, but there's all those apps on the phone that I need to check in to get home tomorrow. We've got a car that could have had Flash installed, and it's just we can't do a thing about it. The only way I could secure my house would be getting a 1950s car with no data in it at all, getting one of those little Nokia phones, going back to pencil and paper, and telling my son he can't have friends. It's too late for consumers to stand a chance to fix this. Okay, you cannot do it at the point of purchase. We need to fix this. Firstly, whoever's in the BMW software engineering team needs to tell their marketing department that Flash is a bad idea. The rest of us, we need to look at our code and start thinking, this is unacceptable. We cannot build in the security violations that are going to be out there. We have to think very hard about what personal information people give away and ensure that people get something meaningful in exchange for it. Sharing my GPS traces in exchange for cycling history and stuff, I'm happy with that. Having my television record what channels my son watches, not so good. So we need to do this. We are the people who are aware of what can be going on. We are the people who are in a position to fix this. So if you take home something from this talk, consider this. All external data is malicious. Just don't trust a single packet that comes over the wire. Assume things like anything talking about buffer length will be lying. And anything that looks a bit like a struct that you're reading in is going to be malicious. For example, the Arrow talk yesterday was talking about in-memory data structures. Assume that in-memory data structure being passed as malicious and its offsets are pointing to somewhere random in your own system memory. Okay, just do not trust any data that comes in from outside. Similarly, I think we need to consider that all interactions with the outside world are leaking some form of personal information. Now, I don't know what we can do about that, but at least be vaguely aware of it. As an example, here is me creating a URL of what is North Korea's new social network and then printing it. Is this secure or insecure? Oh, here's a hint, it's in a talk. What actually happens is when you call URL to string in Java, it does a DNS lookup of the string name you've passed in. So that's me has just done a DNS lookup in Korea. That means North Korea now know that somebody from the UK is interested in their social network. Two, they now have the option of sending a DNS packet all the way back to my house through that Netgear firewall, through the untrusted zone, through my second firewall to my laptop. And as we've seen this year, you can't trust DNS either. So, that's just, we don't think that's insecure, but really it is. So we need to understand all these issues, and ideally we should be running systems that aren't that hopelessly insecure. I'm going to be finishing early. Which brings me to, not Skull, Spark. Spark, anyone? Hands up. Who's running Spark? Spark 1.6.0. Anyone using that version? Oh, you're nervous now, aren't you? This is 10 lines of code, which is in Scala, so it's not really that intelligible. But its name is object file, and the key thing is that green thing, a little bit up from the bottom, says utils deserialize array. What this little function is doing is loading in a file that consists of a series of serialized Java objects. That's a data file that says, oh, well, your Java object's fine. Now, one interesting aspect about Java serialization is it doesn't assume external data is malicious. It just reads it in, introspects, abuses all the registers, and just leaves you in a bad state. And it turns out the biggest vulnerability you can get on this, and is actually very good, is with Groovy. Because in Groovy, you can serialize closures, little lumps of Groovy script. And when someone deserializes it, Groovy will then read that string in, it'll parse that, and it will run that code as you. So what I need to do to run this code in somebody's Spark cluster is to say, please read this file. Here is some interesting data. Why don't you read it? I could put it up online, S3, and say, interesting data set, and Spark will quite happily go and do it. The good news is you have to have Groovy on your class path for this to happen. The bad news is it's actually in Spark Assembly 1.6.0, not because the Spark people wanted it, but because Spark depends on Hive, and the Hive Maven metadata says, by the way, here comes Groovy. That was one of the things I did on Spark, was once we discovered this, was trying to get rid of it. It's not in Spark 1.6.1 or later. But it's an example, actually, of just a really hilarious combination of bugs. There's Java deserialization, the real mistake. It's trying to be helpful. It trusts the data, and it shouldn't. Combined with something on the class path that nobody realized was there and hideously insecure. That combination, we're not in control. So we need to be more aware of what's going on. I also think that we need to move beyond this model of saying, my process is trusted. Java has a sandbox notion, but I think we need to be more in terms of compartmentalizing inside systems as a whole. And you could maybe use containers to do that. So we could say, right, let's use Docker. Let's run in every container, and we'll reduce the damage. Which is good, except when you type Docker pull, you're downloading a binary from somebody else that says, trust me, I am well-meaning and competent. Because here is a list of commands up there, which I believe everyone in this room will have probably typed once in the last week. Hands up, you've done any of these commands. You're not a software developer. You've kept your hand down. Are you an architect, by any chance? Sorry. But the point is, actually, that's amazing, is that the only person in my house that downloads executables on a regular basis, apart from my son's PS4, is me. And I pretty much do it every morning. I come in and do a git pull maven install or something like that. I do an apt-get update. I install random things off NPM, which, because it doesn't work reliably, is probably the most secure bit of the chain. And that's just insane. We're trying to write the secure systems of tomorrow. I'm writing the software that you're running, and yet I'm naively trusting everyone out there with a build file to basically be well-meaning, and the third hop-away version of Groovy to not parse closures. Why are you nodding so much, Nicholas? And when I go back to those things that I really care about, it actually turns out that probably actually those Apache credentials to actually commit code back into Hadoop are probably some of the most sensitive things I have. With my password, I could probably change the build of Hadoop to download to basically run some little Maven plugin that downloads a jar that I stuck up on Maven Central a week before that recognizes if the username is Nick Birch, that will then run random code, steal his credentials, and then delete all his personal data, apart from that really embarrassing photo, which goes up on YouTube. I don't know why you're laughing. You should be looking nervous now. And, we software developers, we've just chosen the wrong process. We're naively trusting, and we have to recognize that we shouldn't do that. We have to be paranoid about everything. At the very least, we should be starting to do things like checking the GPG signatures of stuff we download off Maven Central. Just fixing that bit as a core bit of paranoia. Regarding things like my Apache credentials, I am debating whether I should really be doing something like not have them on my laptop at all. If I really wanted to be nervous, cautious about it, I would actually keep a separate container or something like that where even if somebody breaks into my laptop, it's not there. And then one step more in paranoid would actually be saying, I don't run development tools directly in my laptop, but I run it in a separate VM or container. Because it's just, we're too vulnerable. The only reason that we've got away with it so far is nobody really malicious has set out to do it. I'm tempted now. I was tempted as a proof of concept to actually do it. But I knew it would cause a bit of an upset all around, especially with my colleagues who might ask me to leave the building. But given that some of my colleagues work on the NSA Accumulo project, and I know who else is committed on the Accumulo project, I could be probably running code in the NSA within 2 weeks of setting off. At that point, I would make an enemy of a nation state, and I would die mysteriously in a road accident. And that's really why I'm not going to do it. So that is pretty much it. I will close by pointing out that despite all this, I got a message from LinkedIn saying, by the way, we stole your unsalted hashed password was in fact stolen. And they forgot to tell me about it. So that's about privacy as well as the stuff you stick up on the web isn't actually secure either. So really, those people whose websites are based around collecting people's personal details, they need to care a lot more about privacy too. Again, all the way up the stack. So, like I say, we've lost. It can't be fixed at the consumer point. All that's left is, as developers, we have to start thinking about what to do better. And we're not even aware right now of what we're doing wrong. And finally, never trust a free light bulb which has a USB port on the back of it. Okay? Just bear that in mind, because if you do make an enemy of a nation state, that's where they'd go. You'd think you'd be grateful, but in fact, you'd be collecting their data. So, that's me. Any questions?
Thanks. Thanks, Duke. Questions, comments? There's one in the back.
So how do you realistically see this getting solved in, and how much time?
How do I realistically see this being solved? I really don't know. I think even if I try and do some better compartmentalization of my code at home, I'm still running a Maven build, I'm still creating source code that gets distributed. I think we ought to identify better where those big vulnerabilities are. And the key one is that whole process of downloading and executing binaries as part of our build and release process needs to be looked at. We need to be far more paranoid, at least about the signatures. I think if you want to get involved in this, if you're in an open source project, I would really recommend you actually go on the mailing list that deals with security issues. Because I am on some of the Hadoop stuff, and you soon discover all these things going on, the audits, how to fix this stuff, cross-site scripting vulnerabilities, a version of HTTP client that's version 3 that doesn't check HTTP certificates, and all that kind of stuff. So getting involved in that stuff will give you greater awareness of what's going on. There's things like the ISC SANS news feed of continual security breaches in the world and becoming more aware of the problems. That is not sufficient to at least fix things. At least at that point, you'll be vaguely aware of how vulnerable we are. And maybe you can come up with some better ideas to fix this, okay? The problem is that whenever somebody does security, tries to solve the problem, they end up producing something that's unusable. They end up producing these big container compartmentalized certificate signing mechanisms and all this stuff, and it's just, it's unworkable. And frankly, we developers, we like naively downloading all the binaries as long as our build takes less than 3 minutes. Yeah, I don't really know what to do at all, actually. It's terrifying, because we are building stuff with no security and naively downloading binaries to help do it, and then we're sticking them in cars and televisions, which are going to last for a long, long time. That car's going to be running for another decade from now. Our previous car dated from the Windows XP era, and yet it's still out there and hopelessly insecure.
Thank you.
All right, more questions? If not, then this concludes our session. Thanks a lot for the attendance. We now have a half-hour coffee break, and then we'll be meeting here again in 30 minutes. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you all very much.